وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِّمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم فقهنا في الدين. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا عزيز يا غفار. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and welcome to our second episode of Muslim Women and Leadership series. And we are discussing so far teachers, the Hadith teachers who were Muslim women and their contribution to the field of Hadith. So as you know, in the previous episode that we were talking about, it was the beginning, and we just laid out some of the foundations that why should we delve into this study. And we talked about many contemporary things about feminism and putting the ideas out and things like that. And then we also talked about some of the sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ regarding the education of the women. Just to recap a little bit, that Prophet Mohammed ﷺ always encouraged women to be part of this journey of studying and learning, as we know many famous narrations from him. One of the things that has been very much known to us is that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ always encouraged the girls and the women to attend the 2 Eid prayers, especially the women of his home too. And one would imagine that his wives and his daughters had such an access to education because they were so close to him. Even then, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wanted them to come out of the homes and attend the gatherings of the Eid and the Eid prayer, so he can establish this sunnah right from his home. And you know, there are many other traditions that come in that way. We also know that he had a special day to teach the women, and he would have allocate special time to answer their questions and impart knowledge to them. And also generally when he was teaching in the mosque, his teachings were attended by both men and women. And this is why when you open up the books of Hadith, there are many narrations that have reached us through the women, those who were present, the Sahabiyat, the women around the Messenger who were present when he was teaching, and those are the narrations that have reached us, and many of them are mentioned in the book of Hadith. After that, we also talked about the companions and of the people who came after that they took up this sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ very seriously, and we went over many examples how the companions and the people who came after that, the tabi'in, tabi'in, took this very seriously. And we talked about many examples. We talked about Imam Malik, how his daughter Fatima knew all the hadith that Imam Malik had narrated by heart, and she would teach it to other people. We have other scholars that would be very diligent in teaching their daughters hadith study, and there are many people also we know that they were very keen on in teaching their wives, imparting the knowledge to their wives and enabling them to teach other women. So this has been a tradition within our history. And many times, dear viewers, we hear this thing right now in the modern times when we say that we have entered modernity. Sadly, with entering modernity, Muslim Ummah somehow kind of shied away from this thing. And many times this question comes up: why do we need women scholars and women faqihas and women Muhaddithat, because we have many men who are in this field? The thing is that this question itself represents the idea that we don't understand the value of women being in this field, because dear viewers, and I think you will agree with me, that there are many instances when women are teaching other women, this imparting of knowledge carries a different meaning. There are many issues that with women that other women can understand better. And then again, the women that we're going to talk about today, especially we're going to talk about 3 teachers of Hadith, and you will see that how they were very active in imparting the knowledge of hadith not only to women but also to men. Many great scholars like Imam Zahabi and others like him in the field of hadith, their teachers were women. Okay, Darda, who's a famous muhaddisa and the faqiha from the Muslim world, she said, this is her saying, she said, I have sought worship in everything. I did not find anything more relieving to me than sitting with scholars and exchanging knowledge with them. So Darda, if you go in detail about her, she was a famous faqiha, famous muhaddisa. She used to teach in Bayt al-Maqdis at times, the famous mosque, and she said that she sought worship in many things, but she found great relief and uplift in exchanging knowledge with scholars, sitting and learning from them and things like that. So also, because I am referring to the book over here, this is a famous book, al-Muhaddithat. The book is written by Dr. Akram, and it's a very amazing book to read. He has done an amazing job compiling this work. Another thing that we learn about from his book is that what kind of questions women asked when they attended these gatherings. So it also tells us, what was, the women thinking like, and, what were their concerns at that time. So there is so starting from our mothers, Ummahat al-Mumineen, there is a hadith that is narrated by Salama that the Prophet ﷺ stated that an army heading to the house of God will be destroyed by sinking into the earth. Salama asked, what about one who was forced, meaning that he was not a part of that, but he was forced to be a part of that army? Look at her question. And the Prophet ﷺ said, he will be sunk with them, then they will be raised according to their intention. So just look at the questions that they would ask Prophet ﷺ, and there are many other, another hadith that we know from Zainab bint Abi Salama, who is the daughter of Salama, and she said, I said, O Messenger of Allah, is there reward for me in spending on the children of Abu Salama? So she's narrating something that her mother, Salama, asked Prophet ﷺ, and she said that she asked the Prophet of Allah, is there a reward for me in spending on the children of Abu Salama? I cannot leave them like that, they are my children as well. The Prophet ﷺ said, yes, there is a reward for you on what you spend on them. So these are the hadith that we have them and we benefit from them, because these are the women who are keen on knowledge and they ask the Prophet ﷺ about these things. So when it comes to the preservation of hadith especially, so Muslim women played a great part in that. Today we will talk about a famous muhaddisa. Her name was Karima al-Marwaziyya. Karima al-Marwaziyya, and it is said about her that she is the greatest scholar of hadith that we know so far. How do we know that? So one of the things that we know and which all the Muslim world accepts is the authenticity of Sahih al-Bukhari. So Sahih al-Bukhari is that book of hadith that we all agree on is a very authentic book. And now in those times, remember those, that the printing press came later. Before, what used to happen, people used to learn with the teachers and they would copy the teacher's copy with their own hand. Now there were many versions. Just imagine there is a copy of Sahih Bukhari and people are learning with their teachers and everybody's copying, and we all know not everybody is very accurate in copying. But when you come to the field of hadith, you know that the ulama, the scholars of hadith, were very particular. How they used to teach was that the students would come and learn with the teacher, and the teacher would ask them to copy from their book. And then the students will not be given ijazah or anything like that unless and until they would compare their copy with the copy of the teacher, and everything is similar. There is not only a single mistake. So hadith preservation was a very big thing in the Muslim world. And this lady, her name is Karima al-Marwaziyya. Her version of Sahih Bukhari, the one that she had, the copy of Sahih Bukhari that she had, is considered to be the most authentic. How do we know that? If you look it up, you will find out that which is the most accurate copy of Sahih al-Bukhari that we know. And if you go to the Muslim world, if you Google this, you will find out there was a scholar by the name of Sharfuddin Sharfuddin al-Uniniya, and his copy was called al-Nuskhatul Uniniya. Al-Nuskhatul Uniniya. And if you read that book, you will find out in the preface, in the Muqaddimah of the book, he mentions that he has copied his book that is considered to be the most authentic version of Sahih al-Bukhari, because there were no printing press, people were copying with their hands. He says that he has taken it from Karima al-Marwaziyya. Similarly, the great hadith scholar Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he's known for his commentary on Sahih Bukhari, which is Fath al-Bari. And if you even read the Muqaddimah, the preface of the book, you will find out he even mentions Karima, Sayyida Karima al-Marwaziyya in there, that how he has copied from her. So, and Karima al-Marwaziyya, if you learn about her, she was a very amazing teacher of hadith. Her students would say about her that there was no one who taught hadith like her. And by the way, just imagine where these records are coming from. So these records, that who attended her class, who was there, who was taking, who was doing all of that, there used to be people in the class who would kind of take attendance. And these records are now preserved. And you can see in those records the names of each and every one. So much so, the people who were taking the note of who is in the class would even say that so-and-so was sleeping during the class, and from this hadith to this hadith. Meaning, now when this person will narrate the hadith, we will know that this person cannot do so because he was sleeping through the class at this time. Even so, if a mother is attending the class with their children, by the way, there are many women mentioned in those classes. When you look at the attendance sheet, you can say, or the record keeping, that who is attending the classes. There are many names of men and women who are attending the classes. So much so, one of the records show that 394 students are attending the class, and then the person who is writing the record even says that there are many more, and I might not be able to record all of that, to record all of that. So, and then she says that her students say about her that she was the best of the best, and the way she taught hadith, nobody taught hadith in that manner. So one thing that we know from her is that what she would do is she would sit with the student, and the student would have to copy her from her copy of Sahih Bukhari. The student would sit with her and would have to copy her copy of Sahih al-Bukhari, and then they would have to compare with her present. She would be sitting with the student, and they would compare her copy with her with the copy that they had noted from her. And if there was any mistake, she would ask the student to rewrite the entire thing that had the mistake. So she was that good. And also, we know that she was based in Mecca. She was primarily from Central Asia. She traveled to Palestine, and from Palestine she moved to Mecca and she settled there. And by the time she passed away at the age of more than 100 years old. And through all of that time in her life, she kept teaching the hadith. Her service was in hadith. And some of her famous students are Imam Dhahabi, and other people just like him were her famous students. So she was Fatima. Her name was let me spell it in the right way for people who are taking notes. Somebody wants to know. Her name is Karima, Karima, Karima al-Marwaziyya. Karima al-Marwaziyya is a hadith scholar that we just talked about. So this was the legacy of the Muslim women in preserving hadith. Another thing that we find out that beside memorization, Muslim women were very keen on writing. And we know from the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ that there was a lady by the name of Shifa in the time of the Prophet Mohammed ﷺ, and she was known for her skill of writing. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ asked her to teach that to his wife Hafsa. Sayyidah Hafsa. And also we know that Aisha and Salama were known for their talent of writing, and they are also preserved. What they wrote is also preserved. So also the art of writing spread rapidly among the Muslim women. If you go back in history, you will see that the Muslim women are very much into and keen about calligraphy, and they would learn calligraphy. Many different kinds of calligraphy were taught to them, and they would learn that. And you can also find the copies of the Quran that the Muslim women wrote with their own hands in calligraphy. So one name that I want to bring forth in terms of writing, her name is Fatima bint al-Hasan al-Attar. Fatima bint al-Hasan al-Attar, and she is also known by her kunya al-Fadl. She was known for her calligraphy, and she wrote very well, and her writings were extremely beautiful, and she was invited to write the peace treaty with Byzantinians. So when the peace treaty with Byzantinians were taking place, she was invited to write that, and she traveled for the writing to Mulk Abi Nasr al-Kindi. Ibn Kathir says she used to write the Mansub calligraphy on the pattern of Ibn al-Bawab, who was her teacher. She had another student. Her name was Fakhrun Nisa, and her kunya was Muhammad Chowdhry. And she was also known for her writing skills and her calligraphy, and this is as early as the 3rd century and the 2nd century that we see these women, Muslim women, contributing like that to the field of learning and teaching. Another thing that we come to, and I already told you about her, Karima al-Marwaziyya. She was also known for comparison and correction. Her copy would have side notes on it, and she would be very keen on comparing and correcting the books of the students that would come to learn from her. She would be very keen in that they would copy from her, and then she would correct it. So these Muslim women were also very keen in that the love of Sahih Bukhari was very much among the Muslim women, and most of them taught like that they would be very keen in comparing and correcting the copies that the students took from them. So you can see that over and over when you talk about the Muhaddithat, the teachers of Hadith. Okay. Now another thing that we should I wanted to talk to you about, that which were the venues that these women were learning and teaching at. This is also very important, because this debate also comes right now. And sadly, this happened after we were colonized by the Western nations. And by the way, let me say this, that within the West, if you see the history of education in the West, you will see that up until the 18th century, women are not allowed to get education. And even in 18th century, in the Western societies, when women were allowed to get education, the education was not of the same standard as the men. There's a famous history of Harvard University, that when women pushed to be admitted to the Harvard University, the dean at that time wrote an essay by the name of Well-Being of the Girls. And the essay said that how bad it would be for the girls to be admitted to colleges and universities, as it will be bad for their health, their cycles will be upset, they would not be able to become good mothers and wives. And this was the dean of the time, and this essay from him was nationally circulated everywhere for people, that women should not be pushing for getting education. And another thing that is really amazing when you study the history of education among women in the West is, many of the colleges were established by women. They had the money, and they would donate and give huge amounts of money to establish many colleges, but the women themselves were not allowed to study in them. Just imagine that. Isn't that amazing? But in the Muslim world, as early as 2nd century, you're seeing these women who are the teachers of Hadith and who are the preservers of Hadith, who are so good in the art of writing and learning and reading. Another thing that I did not mention about Karima al-Marwaziyya is that where she taught. So she was teaching. One time she was invited to teach in Medina, and it is said that in Medina some of these Hadith teachers would be teaching, where in the Masjid of the Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if any one of us go to the Masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mosque of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, and we are asked, where would you like to pray? I know what answer we will all give. We will all say we want to pray very close to the grave of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And imagine, this was the place that was chosen for her to sit down and teach. And her students, would write that how she was sitting right next to the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was teaching Sahih Bukhari, and the people who were attending the class were both men and women. And so much so detailed that her students say about her that, she was an older woman, and when she would get tired, she would lean against the grave of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because, she's teaching for a long time. And imagine that. Then, inshallah, in the coming episode, we will also talk about women who were teaching in the mosque of Mecca. They were also teaching over there, but somehow. So this question usually comes to my mind when I go through the history of female education or women education in the West, and the history of education of women in Islam. And I just imagine sometimes and think about it, what happened? Really, this is a question to ask ourselves, what happened? And the only thing that I have come across in my study and readings and all of that is it's a big part of that is attributed to the colonization of our people. Because what happens is, when people become colonized, they literally become slaves. So when people become slaves, they lose many things, right? And still now, and you might agree with me or you might disagree with me, but still now this colonization, this slavery of mind still exists. And still we see this kind of a thing, that this kind of mentality that education of women is not important. Well, things have changed quite a bit, but still I think we need to do better than who we are. And another thing I think that has made the problems complicated is this idea of that education is a source of empowerment, and this word empowerment, because of the feminist critique and all of that, has taken on a very negative meaning. Education in Islam, our hadith that we all know, that education is must for men and women. Prophet ﷺ have said the mafhum, the essence of the hadith is that, but the education is supposed to make us a better person, make us a better slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we don't believe in this kind of a thing that, we need to be as empowered as men, or, Prophet ﷺ said that women are the twin halves of the men. So we don't fight for that kind of equality. There's a measurement. We don't go for the measurement. But the thing is that spiritually, men and women are equal in the eyes of God. And education, the purpose of education is supposed to make us a better human being. In one of the book clubs that I do with some other women, we were reading a book, and I would suggest that book for every mother and father, The Collapse of Parenting. And in that book, the writer goes on and says a very important thing. He asks a question, what is school for? And many times the answer that usually comes up is to get good grades, is to get into good college, is to get a good degree, and then have a good life. And the interesting part is the author of the book calls this a middle class script. And he says there are many things that are wrong in this script, because the purpose of education is to have a meaningful life. But that kind of idea is kind of lost. So the same thing happened with the education of women. They were not educated before because people thought that the faith was that women are inferior when it comes to intellect. And also that if they're educated in this manner, they will not become good mothers and wives. This was the mindset before. This was one extreme. Now we are going to the other extreme, that now the women should be educated because they need to be as empowered as men. And these are both two extremes. The reason that we need to have education is to become good abd of Allah, the good slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We understand this life, we understand the meaning of life. So, and this was the thing, this was the idea why these women were doing what they were doing. You know, of course, there were many men who were muhaddis in their times, there were many men who were faqirs in their times, but it was not a competition. It was about an individual who wants to take on this path to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was it. Okay, so what are some of the places, what were some of the, we can say, you know, the norms or the settings where these women would get education? Like in our times, alhamdulillah, at least in US, we have this thing that the Masjid have a complete area for women. We hold our classes over here. We hold our programs. Somehow in the Muslim world, still this needs to be done. I think things are improving, but we need to move further with that. So, but what were some of the occasions or the places or the norms that the women used to learn and teach at? So, first of all, starting with the Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that, you know, there is a hadith that is narrated by Asma bint Yazid. Asma bint Yazid, you know, she narrated a hadith that sometimes we used to attend Prophet ﷺ's teachings in gatherings. And this hadith that comes from her, from one of those gatherings that the women were attending with the Prophet ﷺ, and the women were in a group, and she mentions the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said to a woman, she was wearing 2 bracelets of gold, and the Prophet ﷺ told her, would you wish God to make you wear 2 bracelets of fire? Asma says, by God, I do not remember if she took them off herself or I took them off. I'm not going to go into the explanation of the hadith because this is not the class for that. But as you know, that this hadith comes from one of the gatherings of the women that Prophet ﷺ was addressing at that time, or there was a group of women together who was attending the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. There's another hadith that comes to us. This is Umayma bint Qais al-Ghafariyya. So what she is from the tribe of Ghifar, and she comes to the Prophet ﷺ. It was the occasion of Khaybar, and the women wanted to go on the battlefield in order to tend the wounded. So this is the time of Khaybar, and the women come to the Prophet ﷺ, and they want to tend to the wounded during the war. So the Prophet ﷺ permitted, saying, with the blessing of God. Then Umayma bin Qais tells her own part of the story. It's an amazing story to read, how these women would learn from Prophet ﷺ and how would Prophet ﷺ respond to that. And she says, then we set out with him. I was a young girl. He made me sit on his she-camel behind the luggage. So this girl who is, this lady who is narrating the hadith to us, Umayma bint Qais, she's a very little girl at that point, and the Prophet ﷺ puts her on the back of the camel with her. And then when they reach the place, and the Prophet ﷺ, you know, she gets off the camel and they look at the luggage, there are some blood stains on that, meaning, you know, and the Prophet ﷺ asks her, and then she says, it was the first time I had a period. Then I sat forward on the camel to hide it, and I was embarrassed. When the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw what happened to me, and he said, perhaps you have had your menstrual bleeding. I said, yes. He said, attend to yourself, then take a container of water, then put salt in it, then wash the affected part of the luggage. And she said she did that. And then what happened after, you know, the war of Khaybar was over, the Prophet ﷺ, out of, you know, what they had, out of the sacks that were brought to him, he took out a necklace. And he put the necklace on her neck with her own hands. And she says that it remained on her neck until she died, and she made a will that it should be buried with her. Also, whenever she cleansed herself, he used salt in the water. And she also said that, you know, I want to be, when you are wrapping me up in the shroud, please make sure that you wash the cloth with salt and water. So this is the hadith that we know from her. But this hadith demonstrates to us that how Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would teach, and you know what kind of affection that he would show for the people who would come to him with questions and would come to him with concerns and would come to him to learn. And these are the women, the young girls and the women who would come to her. And this is what we see, that, you know, this is how he would teach. Just imagine the passion, the affection that Prophet ﷺ is showing towards this woman and girl. And she remembers this thing. Then she says, Asma bint Yazid then said, I was holding the rein of she-camel of the Prophet. Then she narrated something else, that this is the time when Prophet ﷺ is sitting on the camel and she's holding the reins of the camel, and this is the time when Surah al-Ma'idah, some verses of Surah al-Ma'idah were revealed to him. And because we all know that when the verses used to be revealed, Prophet ﷺ would feel the weight of that. So the camel is now feeling the weight of that. And she said she's holding the reins and she can see that. So these were some of the occasions, the public occasions that they were coming in gatherings, they were coming as groups, they were accompanying him to the war, and they were with him over there, and they're learning from him. They're asking these questions and it's teaching them, and we can see the affection and the love with how Prophet ﷺ is teaching the people who would come and learn from them. Another occasion for the women to learn is used to be Hajj. And there are many hadith that are narrated from women when they are accompanying Prophet ﷺ at the time of Hajj. And many hadith, one of the hadith that I will tell you, Abdullah ibn Abbas has narrated that Fadl ibn Abbas have said, the Fadl ibn Abbas was sitting behind the Messenger of Allah, and Fadl ibn Abbas was thought to be a very exceptionally handsome boy. So a woman from a tribe came to ask Prophet ﷺ something, and she stares at the boy, and the boy stares at her, and what the Prophet ﷺ does, he just turns his face away. And then the lady asked the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulallah, Allah has commanded to do Hajj, but my father has become very old and cannot sit on a camel. Can I do Hajj for him? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes. And other women, this is also, just imagine, this is the time of Hajj, and women are taking every opportunity to come to Prophet ﷺ and ask him questions, and he is teaching them and they're learning from him. So a woman brought her child to the Prophet ﷺ during this Hajj, and she said, O Messenger of God, is there a Hajj for this child? He said, yes, and you will get reward for that. So again, we see all the occasions that Prophet ﷺ is teaching the women, and these women are learning hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. Another way that these women would learn hadith from the Prophet ﷺ was to be private occasions, because the fact of the matter was, the women in Medina had easy access to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. They would visit them and they would come to them with questions, and they had the opportunity to learn from Prophet ﷺ. One such hadith is very, very important hadith that is used in legal rulings and all of that, comes from Zainab, the wife of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So the wife of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was an artisan, and she was able to make some income by selling the things she made. So she was a little bit well off than her husband when it comes to finances, and she used to earn her own money. So she heard and then she said that one time Prophet ﷺ gave a speech to us women in which he said, give charity, even it is from your jewelry, even if it is from your jewelry, because you may be the most numerous among the people of the fire on the day of Qiyamah. This sometimes there's a misunderstanding with that. We will talk about it another day. But this is the hadith. So, she asked her husband Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and we know Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was designated by the Prophet ﷺ as a teacher of the Quran. So she asks him that Prophet ﷺ has asked us to give us charity. So can I give my charity to my husband who is not doing very well financially? And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tells her that why don't you go ask the Prophet ﷺ? So she goes to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and she stands outside and she knocks the door. So Bilal, Sayyid Bilal is coming out, and she asks him, can you ask Prophet ﷺ that if I have wealth and I want to give in charity, can I give it to my husband and other orphans that are under our care? And the Prophet ﷺ, when Sayyid Bilal goes in with the question, he comes out and says, Prophet ﷺ is asking which Zainab, meaning Prophet ﷺ is also inquiring that, which lady is that, meaning that he knew the female companions. He knew them by name, he knew about them. And he's asking that because he wants to know who is asking, so the answer is given accordingly. So this is a very important hadith, that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is the Sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ. He's a very learned person in the Quran, and he could have asked the question to Prophet ﷺ himself. But he asked his wife, why don't you go and ask him? He could have followed up with the question with him himself, but he tells his wife to go, and how she goes and how she learns from them. So this is the legacy that Muslim women were given through our mothers, through the women around the Messenger of Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, to the Sahabiyat that were around him. This was the legacy that was given to us. So another figure that I want to bring to your attention that comes later in time, and also a scholar of Hadith. Her name is, let me decide, her name is Fatima bint Ibrahim al-Bitahiyya. Fatima bint Ibrahim al-Bitahiyya, she's from Damascus, and she is also a scholar of Hadith, and her famous students include Imam Dhahabi and Imam Subki, who is very well known for his fiqh. And it is said about her that she went for Hajj, and when she was in Medina, the people found out that she's there. So they told her, because she's coming from Damascus to Mecca to do Hajj, and during her Hajj she goes to Medina, and people find out that great Hadith scholar is here. So they ask her, why don't you teach us Hadith? And again, you find her that she is teaching Hadith, and and in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, and people all over are coming to study with her, because she is the teacher of Hadith, and these amazing Imams, Imam Zahabi, Imam Subki, are learning from her. And after learning Hadith from her, they are the one, they are her students who take it further. So just imagine that, this is the legacy that starts with our mothers, Ummahat al-Mumineen, then the Sahabiyat, and then these are the women who take it further, especially the study of the Hadith. Okay, so besides that, another lady that we will be discussing today, her name is, because another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that traveling. There were women who used to travel for teaching and learning. These were the Muhaddithat, the women teachers of Hadith. They even used to travel to teach and to learn. And there are many people, some of their students used to travel with them to learn from them. And then they would go to different places and teach people. So one of them is the lady that we're going to discuss today, and she's the last one for today, is Fatima bint Sa'id al-Khair. This is the lady that we know that she was a scholar of Hadith. She's an amazing woman. If you look her up in the encyclopedia, almost 20 pages are dedicated to her. The books that she has taught, the Hadith books that she has taught, all her students who learned from her, and through her, from her students who learned from her, and through them, her teachings were spread all over. So, understanding from that, and she has a very amazing history too. Her father was also a scholar, and his name was Sa'd al-Khair. And it is said that he was in the western part of the Muslim empire, but as the Muslim hold in the western part of the world, or the western part of the empire was weakened, the Crusaders, or you can say the Christian Crusaders of the time, started to get more hold in that part, and they used to make it very difficult for Muslims to be in that part, especially the practicing Muslims, the scholars. So her father traveled a great distance, and he was in China when she was born. So her biography, she said that she was born in China, and then she began. Her father had many daughters, and he tended to that fact that all of his daughters would study Hadith. And it is the book goes into great detail how she learns all of this Hadith from different scholars, and her father travels with her at many different places so she can go and learn from that teachers many times. So her Hadith knowledge becomes very solidified. She also studied with another female teacher of Hadith. Her name was Fatima al-Jizdiniya. And some of her amazing students include Muhammad ibn Ismail, who was an amazing scholar of Hadith, and Ismail ibn Azun, he was also an amazing scholar of Hadith, and there are many other students that she had, and through her students, her Hadith reached, her teachings of Sahih Bukhari, her teaching of Hadith reached Baghdad and Egypt and Damascus and many different places. So these were the women, and this was the legacy that the Muslim women carried in terms of education, learning, and teaching. So, just at the end, I just want to bring this question to our viewers and to everyone who is watching, that, just imagine this was the legacy. And what has happened now? We tend to say we are in the times of modernity. We tend to say, oh, we believe in the women empowerment. But the thing is that if you really look at the entire thing, yes, women might have achieved equality. But what about the respect? Have that equality brought respect too? Right? We have to look at these things. I'm not against feminism. I think feminism have raised some of the very important issues of our time. But the thing is that the solutions that they have presented sometimes are you can say are problematic. But one thing that we need to understand is, if there is a problem, people will look for solutions. And if the solution is not going to come from people of education, people of religion, people who are leaders, then people will look for solutions other places. So the problem is there. Within the Muslim world too, there's so much lack of concern when it comes to the education of the women. And this needs to be changed, because if we want to change the future of the Muslim Ummah, we have to educate the women of the Muslim Ummah. I hope this might be a form of motivation for all of us to tend to the education of our daughters, our sisters, our wives, our mothers, and we take a keen interest in arranging for these things. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So my dear,
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما إن الذين يؤذون الله ورسوله لعنهم الله في الدنيا والآخرة وأعد لهم عذابا مهينا والذين يؤذون المؤمنين والمؤمنات بغير ما اكتسبوا فقد احتملوا بهتانا وإثما مبينا.